Dear friends, Australia's foremost scholar in genocide studies, the late Professor Colin Tatz once said, "The Turkish denial of the Armenian Genocide is probably the foremost example of historical perversion, with a mix of academic sophistication and diplomatic thuggery. The Turks have put both memory and history into reverse gear." Of course, we all know that criminals will inevitably lean towards shifting the gear of justice into reverse. However, the only way they can achieve this is if onlookers stop looking, or if they look the other way. In the case of the Armenian Genocide, memory and history can only shift into reverse if nation-states succumb to the diplomatic thuggery highlighted by Professor Tatz. If righteous nations don't pull up the handbrake, justice remains in reverse gear. Sadly, successive Australian national governments are guilty of succumbing to threats by Turkey, which involve holding the sacred memory and graves of our Anzacs as hostages for allowing its repugnant policy of genocide denial to continue unchallenged by Canberra. Australia has played ball, despite knowing that appeasing genocide denial means allowing the cycle of genocide to continue. In fact, on this, the 106th anniversary of the 1915 genocides of Armenians, Assyrians and Greeks committed by the Ottoman Empire, we have been reminded about the danger of the reverse gear more than ever, at least more than any time since Hitler used the Armenian Genocide as an exemplar to commit his Holocaust against the Jews of Europe. Last year, the disturbing ideology that motivated the Hitlers of the Armenian Genocide reared its ugly head again in the Armenian Republic of Artsakh. On 27th September, Azerbaijan's Ilham Aliyev, aided by his fellow Turkic dictator Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, armed by the impunity granted by justice in reverse gear, openly displayed his allegiance to the expansionist ideology of pan-Turkism and committed 44 days of war crimes against the indigenous Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh, with the open intent to cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh of its original inhabitants. During the war that resulted in Azerbaijan's occupation of a key piece of Armenia's ancestral homeland, a Turkish defense official was asked on a working visit to Europe whether he was hopeful there would be a cessation of hostilities. He answered that for peace to ensue in Nagorno-Karabakh, there couldn't be Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. 106 years after the Armenian Genocide, unpunished Turkey is essentially stating that for the suicide drones to stop firing, for the cluster munitions to stop causing civilian carnage, for the phosphorus bombs to stop burning, there would need to be no Armenians left in their native Nagorno-Karabakh. This declaration was typical of the open threats of ethnic cleansing and genocide being spat out by the neo-Ottoman leaders of Turkey and Azerbaijan, as Armenians around the world, including here in Australia, cried out for the world to put aside all their oil and weapon deals, call out bluffs dishonouring fallen Anzacs, and recognise what was going on as military aggression and war crimes. Instead, there was silence that breeds violence. Violence that has caused 100,000 Armenians to be homeless, 5,000 dead, hundreds of prisoners of war still in Azerbaijani captivity, and cultural and religious sites being desecrated every single day. Initially, our federal government refused to call out the Azerbaijani-Turkish attacks on Artsakh, like it refuses to recognise that 1915 were genocides. However, our community's intergenerational trauma, triggered by the attacks last year, led to unprecedented mobilisation, which ensured Canberra was left in no doubt that these denialist appeasing, attacker-forgiving positions are unacceptable to Armenian Australians.
For our Australian people here to recognize and to get to know exactly what is happening in our homeland.
Our community demanded that our government needed to call out that neo-Ottoman genocide deniers are trying to finally realize their repulsive dream of a pan-Turkic state stretching from today's Turkey to Central Asia. And their dictatorial leaders will rid these poor little Christian Armenians laying inconveniently in their way.
In Sydney, hundreds of people have taken to the streets to call for peace in the region.
Australian Armenians worried for family and friends fighting on the other side of the world. They took to the streets eager to make their voices heard.
I'm emotional because it's not just a piece of land. For Azerbaijan, it is just territory, but for us, it's our heritage, it's our absolute existence.
Hundreds of Armenian Australians today marched through the streets of the city from ABC headquarters in Ultimo to Martin Place. Organisers say they want the Australian government to end their silence and condemn attacks on Armenians who are battling with Azerbaijan.
Our community marched, we protested, we advocated. Eventually, Australia shifted the gear of justice from reverse to neutral. The Foreign Minister said that the final resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict must be achieved under the auspices of all three co-chair countries of the OSCE Minsk Group, not only Russia, and that the principle of self-determination must be equally considered with territorial integrity and the non-use of force in reaching a just settlement of the conflict. Our community's advocacy on the Armenian Genocide has made the Australian government's position of non-recognition untenable. The messages we have received for this 106th anniversary commemoration are from political leaders representing the government, opposition and crossbenchers. They will show that Australia has already spoken. We are just waiting for our government to join us. The elected representatives of the country want Australia to join 2 of its states and 30 fellow nations in recognising the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocides as genocides. The Joint Justice Initiative of the Armenian Australian, Assyrian Australian and Greek Australian communities has attracted over 40 parliamentarians to sign affirmations of support, solidifying that recognition of our genocides is non-partisan and near unanimous, just like 2 House of Representatives motions favourably recognised through debates in 2018. While Prime Minister Scott Morrison has again sadly this year succumbed to gearing into reverse on this issue by failing to accurately recognise the Armenian Genocide, he has done so in the face of unprecedented calls for him to do what's right. His own parliamentary party, from ministers to backbenchers, his political opponents, state premiers, local councils, the Jewish, Assyrian, Greek, Kurdish and other community representative bodies, networks of churches and others have all called on him to recognise the Armenian Genocide as fact. Rejecting this appeal to do what's right is short-sighted, morally hollow and not an enduring strategy which goes against Australia's proud reputation on important issues of human rights. Making the Prime Minister's position on this issue even more untenable is his own opinion. In 2011, as a backbench MP, Scott Morrison called for Australia to recognise the Armenian Genocide.
Important we recognise the Armenian Genocide for what it was. This is one act we should never forget, dare we allow it to ever be repeated.
Our community will hold him and his government to account on this issue, like all governments to account on this issue, as it is not only offensive because of our historical lineage, it borders on complicity as atrocities continue to be committed against Armenians. We will continue to march, to protest, to advocate, and through programs like the Armenian National Committee of Australia Youth Advocates, we will ensure this battle lasts as long as it needs to, until the handbrake is pulled up on Turkey's reverse gear and Australia stands on her 2 feet and recognises what was committed against the Armenians, Assyrians and Greeks in 1915 as genocide. We remember, we demand.